Hey guys, this is Thomas over here, nursemoneytalk.com. And in this video, I'm going to really walk you through the steps on how to apply to new grad nursing jobs. But before I get into that, if you're not already subscribed, I want to go ahead and invite you to hit that subscribe button. On this channel, I talk about all things related to nurse, nursing student, and of course, nurse life. So let's go ahead and get to it. The first thing I would encourage you to do is to really look at doing a self-assessment. Really, you might be wondering, what do I mean by self-assessment? Well, it's kind of really is what it sounds like assess kind of like yourself, really looking at maybe what are your interests, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and on top of that, maybe looking at what you're looking for in terms of a nursing job. And with that, you want to then determine what nursing specialty you would like to go in based on that self-assessment and what you're actually looking for. The nursing profession is very diverse. There's a lot of options out there. And despite, what older nurses might tell you about how oh, you should only work in med surg. I've already really talked about this in numerous videos like this one that I go over why I don't really agree with that you should only work in med surg type thing. But really, you should work in a specialty that fits your interests, fits your goals, and then also ideally probably meshes with whatever your strengths and weaknesses are. The next thing you want to do is look at writing the quote unquote perfect new nurse resume, or really just for many of you, you don't have a resume at all. Or maybe you have one, but it hasn't been touched in maybe several years, especially if you're like a non-traditional nursing student. And so you really want to make sure you write a resume, but not just any resume. Don't go with a generic resume. Really look at a resume that is then tailored to whatever nursing position you want. And then on top of that, you want to then start crafting a compelling cover letter. I want you to go ahead and write this out based on whatever specialty you want, because we're going to go back and we're going to touch it up a bit based on the actual job you're applying to, like the specific job. But I think really having a framework down is really ideal. And the reason why I say that is because if you like finding templates that can help you kind of in the right direction and kind of help you start somewhere. If you go to nursemoneytalk.com and if you search, I have templates on there for new nurse resumes or new grad resumes, along with examples as well. On top of that, I also have examples on crafting a new nurse cover letter as well. And so I have templates and I have examples of that. And you can just go to nursemoneytalk.com. I'll try to remember to put a link to that in the descriptions below. And then you can really then see what all of that looks like, and then just kind of use that as a framework. Now that you have an idea of what job you want, you have kind of like the initial first draft, if you will, of your resume and cover letter. Now I think you need to start networking. Networking is something that not enough people think about. I don't think nursing school really does a good job in terms of really talking about how important networking is, especially in terms of getting that job, right? And so something to think about is that if you're just putting in like random job applications here and there, not saying that those don't work or that you shouldn't do it, and you'll most likely will do some of that anyway. But if you think about it, if you're putting in random job applications, like you're now competing with everybody else, internal, external, everybody else. Like you're just another number of applications that are putting in. But if you network, let's say you get an opportunity to actually talk to the hiring nurse manager, or you get an opportunity to talk to somebody who already works in that field, already works in that department that you want, and that person gets to know you, they get to know your work ethic, and they're like, oh, this is the type of person I want to work with. Well, that person is more likely to put in a good word for you, to tell, hey, Susie hiring manager, keep an eye out for Jane, the new grad RN. Like, they're a hard worker, they're a stellar nurse, they have a lot of potential, a very pleasant person to be around. And so that nurse manager will then keep an eye out on it. And in a lot of instances, as their applications are going through, maybe if it's something that the application tracking system would have even have kicked out, that manager would then go ahead and just pull that resume and look at it, because now they already have a reference. They already have somebody who works in that department that's giving a good word, that is able to, if you will, testify on your character. And that bodes really well in terms of you being able to get that job, as opposed to if you're just blindly applying. And so some of how you can do that is by really leveraging your nursing school network, right? Really looking at, maybe you have faculty members who they know some people, which a lot of faculty members, they tend to be old, they tend to be experienced. Nothing wrong with any of that, but the fact that they've been nurses for a really long time means that they know a lot of people. They've had a lot of students graduate. They've probably have kept up with some of those students, and some of those students are going to be in hiring positions. And don't be surprised that some of those former students who are now in that hiring position are not reaching back to that nursing school faculty and be like, hey, do you have any stellar nurses that are graduating that I should keep an eye out on? So these are some of the things you need to leverage. Another option is to really look at maybe some professional nursing organizations, maybe your chapter. Some of these professional nursing organizations, even if you're not already a nurse yet, some of them will have a student membership, or maybe give you the opportunity to come to certain meetings as well. And really, those are important, because then you get to network with other nurses in your area. Those can be very important. Along with that, you would want to leverage any contacts you might have during a clinical rotation. So as you're going through your rotation, see if you get an opportunity to talk to the nurse manager, or maybe then start talking to some of the other nurses, especially if you've been in the same floor department or whatever for multiple periods in a row, and you're seeing the same people and you're making a good impression, you're working hard and everything else. Then maybe ask hey, do you think, is the nurse manager there? Do you think I can talk to the nurse manager? Do you know if you guys are hiring? Just strike up that conversation and just kind of see where that goes. I think those really leveraging your nursing school faculty, professional organizations, looking at your clinical opportunities there during your clinical rotations. I think those are really going to be a lot of your high yield positions, especially if you have leadership or whatever. Try to get into a leadership clinical rotation or whatever at the place that you want. But like I said, high yield, you would then also probably consider what I would probably consider more low yield, but, still very important part of this entire process, which is looking at your job boards, right? More or less, all the job boards are essentially the same. Honestly, that's truth be told. You can go to the job board. Of course, we have a job board, and on nursemoneytalk.com/jobs. So that is the one I am gonna, probably steer you towards, because that's the job board that we host. But honestly, the back end of pretty much all of those job boards, they tend to be relatively the same, because when companies are putting in job positions, they tend to really put them in and scatter them out towards like every job board out there. And then really you have some main big job boards, and then a lot of the smaller players are then piggybacking off of those job boards. So if they go to this one big job board, then if you're a small player that then uses big job board, then you will get those jobs that are available there. So long story short, I probably would, maybe would probably just go to a job board. Like I said, I would, I'm going to steer you towards ours. Start looking for jobs in your area that kind of fits, like I said, what you want based on what you should have already figured out based on your self-assessment, and then start applying to those. You will want the one that specifically says new nurse position, entry-level position, something like that. You'll really want to make sure that you're putting in the effort into those jobs. A lot of the initial filling out part will be the same, references and all that other stuff. Make sure you have good references. Make sure that they're credible references. So really for you guys, you would want faculty member. I would probably steer clear of like mom and dad, unless there's like a really like you've been working for mom and dad for like a company doing actually something credible. Other than that, I would probably go steer more towards like professional references. So like faculty would be, nursing school faculty would be a good one. I'm guessing if you have like a mentor, if you work another job, your manager there would be a good one. And this is like, even if you work at another job and it's like fast food, I think, and because that's going to be on your resume, so having that manager or one of those managers as a reference would be pretty good. When you're putting people down as references, you want to make sure to ask them and make sure they know. Don't just ask them if they can be a reference. Ask them specifically, hey, would you be able to give me a good reference? Make sure you specifically phrase it like that, because you don't want to put somebody's name down as a reference and then they say okay, but then somebody calls them and then they say something that is anything other than flattering. And so you would think people wouldn't do that, but there's a reason why I'm saying that you want to ask them specifically and make sure that they would be willing to give you a good reference. And make sure you're being smart about the people who you're asking for references, because if you are a slacker at a certain job and you know that the manager has an issue with you, with your work ethic and whatever, it's probably not a good idea to try to use that person as a reference. I feel like that is a dumb moment, but once again, that needs to be said. And so that's like that reference part. The other really part, because you probably won't have a long work history, the other part is just make sure that your resume, if there's enough interest, I might do like another video specifically looking at resume. But like I said before, you can go find a template. I'll put a link in the descriptions below, but you can go to nursemoneytalk.com and then just kind of search there. But you will want to make sure that you have a resume like the one we had earlier, but you want to then tailor it to that job. So even if it's in the same specialty, like let's say you wanted to go into the ICU or whatever, and you wrote a generic one specifically for the ICU, now go back in there and really try to touch it up with maybe like any of the buzzwords or any of like the language that's used in the job application that might kind of lean you towards like, this is what this company specifically cares about. And so just kind of touch up your resume there. And then also the same thing with the cover letter, and especially try to find out who you're addressing that cover letter to as you put it in there. Get Grammarly. Go to nursemoneytalk.com/Grammarly. The free one is really good. I would honestly just recommend you due to one-time payment. I know it's a pain in the butt, but it's probably in like from every grammar and spelling checker or whatever that's out there. And considering what I do writing content on the internet, I've used a bunch of them, all of them. This is hands down probably the best one. I haven't found any that's even been remotely close. And then I would just pay for it one time. Just make sure you then actually run through your cover letter, run through your resumes, because you will be tailoring those. So if you apply to 10 different jobs, your resume probably won't change that much, but your cover letter will probably change a little bit more. And so as you're changing that, you'll want to make sure that you are running it through and there's no errors, that it's about as perfect as you can get it to be. Because you don't want to send something that then makes you look like you're sloppy. Like I said, and that's nursemoneytalk.com/Grammarly. You'll see it on the screen. Linked will also be in the descriptions below. Now that I'm thinking about it, as you're applying to these jobs, and I already mentioned like you want to look for new nurse positions, entry-level positions, and whatever. Make sure you keep an eye out for the new grad nursing residency or new nurse residency, whatever they're calling it. Some of those are really just like new nurse orientation with just a buzzword on it, but some of them have been actually, from what I've seen and what they're doing, have been spot on in terms of like how they honestly kind of hold your hand for like the first 6 months or a year, and then gradually kind of ease you into independent practice. I've seen some that have been, okay. And then other ones that have been like, this is some pretty top-notch stuff. So if you see something like that, see if you can find some more information, maybe ask your faculty, but it's definitely worth looking into, because I think that for these nurse residencies, there's definitely some benefit to many of them. So you've done everything you need to do. You've applied for jobs and you're starting to get some callbacks in terms of scheduling for an interview. So now what do you do at that point? Once again, nursemoneytalk.com. I have several articles that go over interviewing, what to wear, how to prepare for that, and all that other good stuff that I'm going to cover in a lot more detail, but I'm just going to hit the highlights. So schedule the interview time, ideally for whatever the soonest time is possible, and a time that you know for sure you can make it and make it on time. So if you are not a morning person and you're constantly late for morning things, don't schedule something for 8 a.m. That is like literally setting yourself up for failure. So don't do that. Just like as an example. But preparing for this interview, research the organization, familiarize yourself with the patient populations, the missions, and the whole 9 yards. Just make sure you have, like, you don't have to get like a master's or PhD in general hospital or whatever they are, but you just want to have some idea of the hospital and the department that you're going into, because you're going to have an interview and some of that could potentially come up. So make sure you have an idea of the facility, because as an example, right, you don't want to, you tell them like, like they ask you like one of those like, why do you want to work here type questions. And then you start saying that, oh, I want to work here because of blah, 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 blah. And it turns out that the thing you're talking about, they don't even do it there. That is not a good look, just like as an example. And so really looking at the interview as well, like you want to practice some of the common nursing interview questions that you're going to get. So things like, why do you want to work here? They use more behavioral type questions. So a lot of times, so it probably would be like, tell me about a time that you had to deal with a difficult patient. Or even like one of those, like, what are your strengths and weaknesses type questions. And so you want to practice those. And once again, nursemoneytalk.com, their I have a lot of articles on practice or nursing interview practice questions. Some of them based on new nurses, and even like some that are based specifically on specialty areas. So definitely check those out. Those are not like, I don't know what questions they're going to ask. And so really those practice questions, they're more to give you an idea. Like, don't memorize anything, but as you practice it, you're almost kind of like, you're creating kind of like bullet points in your head of things where like, oh, they asked me questions and it's roughly about this. I kind of already know like how I'm going to steer that question. Or especially for a lot of these behavioral type questions, like, as you're practicing it using like the examples that I have on nursemoneytalk.com, you're really kind of then trying to figure out what stories you could potentially use to help kind of illustrate some of these like key behavioral questions or behavioral answers or whatever that you're going to have to give. So just make sure you're practicing those. So I mentioned this in the articles on Nurse Money Talk that has to do with interviews. But one thing I will throw in here is just at the end of the interview, just make sure you already have questions that you're going to ask. So I have actually some of these questions on Nurse Money Talk. And so, something like, what does a typical day look like in this role? Or how does the company support professional development? And so just kind of like some of the questions that you can ask at the end. It can show that you're engaged, that you're actually like interested in working for that company. And also at the same time, it gives you more information about that role, because it's true that you're trying to convince the hiring manager that they should hire you, and you're being interviewed for that. But don't forget this fact that you are also interviewing them. To a lesser extent, you're also interviewing them. And by you asking questions and looking around at, especially if it is a, if you're being interviewed by, some of the nurses that you could be working with, so like your peers, you're also trying to figure out, do I even want to work here? Do I want to be around these nurses? Do I want to work under this manager? So you're also trying to figure this out. And this is why you want to, as you're applying, you want to cast a wide net, because ideally you'll have a lot of different opportunities, because at the end, you want to jot down what notes you have on them, because you want to figure out, okay, I interviewed for, let's say, 5 positions. I got an offer for 3 of them. Now I'm trying to figure out which one should I go to? Which one is then going to best support you in what your long-term kind of goal is? And so you need to keep that in mind as well. Before I get to the next part, I want to quickly just kind of ask that if you are finding this video helpful, that I would really appreciate the thumbs up. And if you think that there are other new nurses, or maybe even like your friends or peers who would benefit from this video, that I just ask if you would actually share this video with them, because it really does help the YouTube algorithm in terms of making sure that more new nurses can find this video and benefit from this video. So I would really appreciate that. And so getting into the next one, which is kind of what happens after the interview. And really like what I'm calling, like, you want to seal the deal, is go ahead and send a thank you note. This could be like, probably however many years ago, this would be like a personal letter. I think nowadays, an email. So if you have the person's email, just kind of like send them a thank you letter expressing kind of like your gratitude to them for the opportunity that you had to actually interview, maybe recap a couple of things. I give more information, more detail about this, and you can find it on nursemoneytalk.com. And really, all of this can be found on the interview section on Nurse Money Talk. And that there's a link to that in the descriptions below. And because that thank you note serves as really a way to make sure that you remain in the top of their mind, right? You know, it's one of those things where if you're thinking about this on like the analogy I've given, is like if it's like a basketball or if it's like a sports game, football, whatever, and it's based on a point system. So really every little thing, I mean, there's ones that are like big ones, right? Like, you know, these are like 3 points versus like a 2 point or a 1 point, you know, in basketball, or even like, you know, or something like that. Like, for example, like a big point would be, or you losing a big point would be showing up to the interview very late and not looking professional. But some of these other ones, like sending a thank you note, I look at them more or less like, you know, these little points here and there that can add up to potentially help you win the game, or in other words, to help, you know, kind of work in your favor. So I would really encourage you to send a note. And whenever you send the note, you want to be patient. You know, you don't want to, you know, follow up the next day. Sometimes they might give you a date where they'll, you know, start calling people back for maybe a second interview, or start kind of, you know, giving people responses to whether they've been accepted or not. But I would probably give it probably about maybe like 5 working days, give or take. So, you know, something like that. And then, you know, probably follow up and see. And so for a lot of these points, this is kind of a rinse and repeat type thing for all the other interviews that you'll have. As you're preparing for your role as a new nurse, something that might help you would be the New Nurse Academy. You can get to that by going to nursemoneytalk.com/New Nurse Academy. Link is also in the descriptions below. And it's just a course that bridges the gap between, you know, your nursing school program and actual clinical practice, and really getting into things such as like documentation, IV insertions, kind of like some of the things that nursing school really doesn't have time to teach, or is too specific for them to teach. So really the New Nurse Academy, I think, can handle a lot of those things, or some of those things, just kind of depending on where you work. So check that out, nursemoneytalk.com/New Nurse Academy. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you very soon in that next video.